Hello, and welcome to Ralph Reads, brought to you by TURN, the United Ronin Networks here on YouTube. My name is R4. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. Wasting no time, in continuation of Donald Goines' El Dorado read, let the reading commence. Chapter 7. As evening shadows began to fall, Buddy glanced out of the window of the garage. He released the torn polka dot curtain and let it fall back in place. He turned and surveyed the other occupants in the room openly and coldly. The contempt that he so openly displayed was lost on the other men as they continued to snort up the rest of the drugs. Buddy hated drugs, coke, heroin, pills. It didn't matter. He hated them all. Ever since his younger sister had died from an overdose when he was 17, he had taken a strong dislike to narcotics. "How long, man?" he inquired to no one in particular. "Just be cool, baby," Samson replied lightly as he took another snort of the small pile of girl in front of him. "Danny, you about finished, baby boy?" he asked as he snorted up the last of the dope he had on his cigarette pack. For the past hour, Buddy had been trying not to look over in Danny's direction. He couldn't stand the sight of the blood running down the man's arm as Danny methodically sought the elusive vein. "It ain't but a minute now, partner," Danny stated as he slowly pushed the bulb and the heroin flowed into his vein. Buddy watched the man as he jacked the outfit off, allowing the blood to run back into the dropper. Frowning in anger, Buddy looked away. "If I ever have reason to take off another play like this," he promised himself, "I'll surely use somebody other than these motherfuckers." "Well, Danny," Buddy began, "if you're finished, we can get the fuck on with our job before it's too late." Danny squirted the water out of his outfit onto the floor as he cleaned out his works. "I'm ready whenever the rest of you guys are," he stated loudly, getting up and stretching. "Damn, but that's some good blow." Samson stood up too. "Come on, Tubbs, let's go get rich." The heavyset man hesitated for a minute. How he wished that he had enough nerve to tell him that he wasn't going. The last thing Tubb wanted was to go on another stick-up. He had prayed that the first one would go off without a hitch, promising his God that if he got away clean, he'd never go on another stick-up again as long as he lived. Now here he was, 4 or 5 hours later, getting ready to go on another robbery. Tubby sighed deeply and stood up. The cocaine had made his nerves worse than ever. He was actually trembling as he followed the men out of the garage. "I wish we had somebody in the crowd tall enough to pass for a damn policeman in uniform," Samson stated as the men got in the car. "It would go off sweet as a motherfucker then." "What's wrong, man?" Tubb inquired in a frightened voice. "You don't think nothing is gonna happen, do you?" "Hell nah," Buddy replied for Samson. "He's just talking, that's all. It would be nice if somebody had on a policeman's outfit, but since we ain't got it, we have to operate with what we got." Tubby let out a deep moan. "I don't like it. If we get greedy like we're doing, we're just asking for some kind of trouble. You guys are nuts, really. Here you go and take off a joint for over $15,000 and you guys still ain't happy. How many small-time operators like us ever get the chance to really knock off $15,000 and get away with it?" He looked at the others before he continued. "Have you guys stopped and asked yourselves that? Nah, I know you ain't. 'Cause if you had, you'd be back at the garage tossing money into the air." "Bullshit," Buddy stated, making the words sound like dirt. "When you refer to small-time punks, you're only talking about yourself, Tubby. Everybody else in this ride considers himself a big boy, not a small-time operator." Before Tubby could answer, Buddy continued. "The only difference between a small-time stick-up man and a big-time operator is the size of the job he takes off, Tubby. From the size of our job, we ain't small-time. Just the fact that we have over 15 grand put-up shows, we ain't some nickel-and-dime motherfuckers out here trying to get fix money." "Run it down, baby," Danny yelled as he came out of a nod. Spit ran out of the corners of his mouth as he fell back into another nod. God damn, Samson, look at that motherfucker! You think he's gonna be able to take care of his end of it? Buddy asked, nodding his head in Danny's direction. Samson glanced in the car mirror. Don't let it worry you, buddy. I'm the one who has to depend on Danny backing us up, not you. You ain't got no problem sitting out in the ride except the seat might become hard on your ass. Tender buns, Danny yelled out, then began to laugh wildly. You didn't tell why our partner has tender buns, Samson, baby. You been holding out on me or something? He continued to laugh wildly, disregarding Buddy's angry stare. You better watch yourself, Danny. I don't play that shit, man, Buddy stated coldly. No kidding, Daddy replied. You don't cook, but you eat, boy, don't you, baby boy? There was no laughter in Danny's voice now. He seemed to be cold sober. Now, it was Samson's turn to laugh. You see, Buddy, he ain't nodding no more, is he? Buddy didn't bother to answer, but instead turned around in his seat and ignored the rest of the men. I sometimes wonder, man, how the fuck did we ever allow this cat to start fucking around with us? He comes on funny most of the time, just like some white kid trying to be hip. If the rest of the guys in Chicago are like you, Detroit can do without them cats. Nah, it ain't like that, Tubby said, speaking for the first time since getting in the car. I got some cousins over there, man. Ain't no kind of shit they take from nobody. Them brothers is real swingers. They belong to some kind of Rangers or some such club. All of them brothers stick together, too. Ain't like the Big D, where so many brothers is starting to snitch on each other. They tell me the guy who's always talking about other people snitching is the one you have to worry about the most, Buddy said, trying to cut somebody else up since Danny had done such a good job on him. Instantly, Tubby went on the defensive. You ain't got no cause to call me no snitch, Buddy. Ain't no mud on my name, and ain't none ever been on my name. Ain't that right, Samson? A slight frown crossed Samson's face, then disappeared just as quickly. If there was one thing Samson hated, it was for someone to make a yes man out of him. He realized, though, that Tubby was weak and needed someone to boost up his ego. Right now, since they were going on a job, he needed Tubby in complete control of himself. That don't even need to be answered. If you wasn't cool, Tubbs, you think me and Danny will be fucking with you? Especially on a big job like this, baby? Don't nothing but big fellows fuck with big fellows. Your problem is, Tubby, you don't realize just how mellow you are. Samson slowed down and made a right turn, then added, after we rip off this job, baby, you're gonna have to fight the young bitches off. Buddy didn't bother to look out the window to conceal the scorn in his face. Why, he wondered, did Samson bother to fatten up the frightened little fat man? Everybody knew he was scared to death. A blind man could see that. Buddy laughed as he wondered if the fat man ever pissed on himself while taking off a job. How the fuck they ever talked him into getting up the nerve to try sticking up someone was beyond Buddy's imagination. It was true enough the guy looked the part. He was big and ugly, but that was as far as it went. His heart wasn't even as big as a pumpkin seed. Make a left on the next corner, Samson, Buddy directed. Now, don't forget, Buddy began. This ain't like the last one. This is a private house, a two-family job, but don't nobody stay upstairs. He waited until he was sure everybody had his ears open. Then he continued. Now, I came over early this morning when there wasn't nobody here and cleaned up the joint. When I took the trash out, I went into the basement and opened the window in the rear, one that nobody would notice unless they were looking for it. That's why I want you to be sure to lock it as soon as you enter. That way, when they start trying to figure out how you guys got in, they won't have no way of knowing it was through the rear basement window. When we get through this window, Danny said, taking a serious interest in what was being said, we ain't gonna run into much trouble upstairs, right? Shouldn't be no problem for you guys, Buddy replied coldly, still angry with Danny for shooting up before taking off the job. It ain't but 3 old men upstairs. Every one of them is damn near 50 years old. The only gun in the joint is a shotgun, and it's always in the bedroom out of the way. Now, if you guys creep up the steps right, you'll take them completely by surprise. I mean it. They won't know what hit them. More than likely, they'll be too busy figuring up the night's take to even hear you guys coming up. It sounds sweet, Samson said. If it hadn't, I wouldn't be out here tonight, not after that first job. The first one was so mellow that I can't help but to take Buddy's word on this second one. The guy has given us information that some guys will give their left nut for. Right there, Buddy said. That's right. Pull in the alley. We're going to park right behind the vacant house next door. Then I'll get out and lead you guys to the window so there won't be no mistake. I put a little grease on the motherfucker so it will open and close without any kind of noise. My man, you do know how to take care of business, Samson stated, smiling broadly. He followed the directions and parked. The men got out quietly and made their way through the alley. God damn it! Danny cursed loudly, kicking a bottle away. They all glanced at him, but no one spoke. When they reached the gate, Buddy lifted the latch and led the way into the yard. Now the men walked on their tippy toes. Buddy stopped at a window in the rear of the house. He slowly raised the old window frame. It came up without a sound. Samson was the first one through the window. He climbed in slowly, followed closely by Danny. Samson felt his way around, making sure there was nothing in the way of the other men. He helped Danny down. The both men waited and helped the heavyset man through. Tubby had trouble, and for a minute the men thought that he was going to become stuck in the window. Tubby got his head and shoulders in, but that was as far as he can go. Buddy pushed from the outside while the men in the basement grabbed his arms and pulled. He groaned as they pushed and shoved until finally they managed to get the fat man through. God damn it, Danny said under his breath so that his voice wouldn't carry. That's the last time I'll ever take a chance like that. We could have blown the whole fucking thing with his fat ass. Tubby was hunched over, rubbing his stomach. What you want to do, he said as he straightened up. Stay down here and cry over something that's all over, or get on with it? The enveloping blackness of the basement was so complete that the men couldn't even see each other. As Samson led the way, they had to hold each other's hands. Samson lit matches as he slowly made his way across the basement floor. When he reached the stairway, he attempted to empty his mind before climbing the wooden steps. He could feel his blood racing. There was a heightened sense of awareness about him. When Samson reached the top of the stairway, there was a closed door in front of him. He prayed quietly that it wouldn't be locked. As he leaned against it, he could hear the hum of an adding machine. You guys ready? He asked calmly, not able to see his men in the darkness. Samson removed his pistol, then made sure each man had his gun out also. It was an unnecessary stall, but for some reason, he wanted to delay the final act. Finally, he couldn't put it off any longer. He could feel the men growing restless behind him. He tried the knob, and the door opened. Samson looked at his own men as he stepped into the light of the kitchen. Each of them had put on ski masks. He remembered suddenly that he also had a mask. He quickly pulled it out of his pocket and slipped it on. Sounds of activity were coming from the front room. Samson took a deep breath and burst through the open doorway that led into the dining room and eventually to the front room. As the men moved quickly through the dining room, they passed the bedroom door. Without stopping, Samson beckoned to Danny with his gun. Danny jerked his head up and down, acknowledging the silent order. He stopped and pushed open the bedroom door. To his surprise, there was a couple inside, busy making love. His silent entrance took them by surprise. The woman was the first one to notice the man standing in the doorway holding a gun. Without warning, the woman screamed. The scream brought Danny back to reality. He had been admiring the young golden body reclining on the bed in a lover's embrace. She was tall and slim, and her long, lithe body was even more beautiful than Danny had imagined a woman's could be. Since he was strung out, sex was something he rarely thought about, but the unexpected sight aroused him completely. The sound of the woman's scream brought the two men working in the living room to attention, but it was too late. They found themselves staring into the barrels of the two pistols held by the stick-up men. Tubby glanced over his shoulder. The scream had almost scared the shit out of him. He still didn't know what had happened. Danny hadn't come out of the bedroom yet. From where Tubby stood, he couldn't see him standing in the doorway. "Go check it out, the scream and everything," Samson ordered sharply. "I can handle these two." One of the middle-aged men in the living room began to inch his way nearer the shotgun lying on the table. "Go ahead, reach for it," Samson told the man. "Let's see how big a hole this 38 can make in your damn ass." The man jerked his hand back as if he had touched something hot. "Just be cool with that gun, blood," the man said as he stepped farther away from the shotgun. "We ain't gonna give you guys no trouble, so don't hurt nobody." Samson moved over to the table and picked up the shotgun. The silence that enveloped the room was like a blanket. The men being held up stared at the shotgun as if it were a deadly snake. There was fear in their eyes as they stood motionless, waiting to see which way the gunmen were going to go. People had been killed in numbers robberies, and each man hoped that it wouldn't happen in this one. "What's holding you guys up back there?" Samson asked, yelling so that the men in the bedroom could hear him. Tubby reappeared from the rear. "Danny's waiting," he said, not being quick enough to stop himself from mentioning Danny's name. "He's waiting on this broad to put some clothes on." They were back there fucking when he barged in on them. Tubby smiled under his mask and added, "Boy, that's one fine bitch back there." "We got more important things on our mind than some fucking bitch," Samson warned. "Hey you, what's your name?" Samson asked the man who had tried to reach the shotgun. "Mike. Everybody calls me Mike," the man stated shortly, acting as if it pained him to speak. "Uh-huh," Samson began, smacking his lips. "I'm gonna ask you one time, Mike," he said, pulling back the hammer on the double-barreled shotgun. "Where the fuck is the money?" Mike swallowed, then glanced over to his partner. He nodded his head at a brown bag sitting on the floor next to the table. "Damn," Samson cursed. "If it had been a snake, it would have bit me," he said, realizing he should have spotted it himself. He broke the gun open and took out the 2 shotgun shells. Then he walked over and looked down at the bag. It was full of money and white envelopes. The loose money was all in small bills. The sound of a woman's shrill voice came to them as Samson set the bag down on the couch. "You don't have to point that thing in my direction," the woman said as she walked out of the bedroom and came into the front room. She was followed closely by a slim, brown-skinned man attired only in a pair of shorts. Danny brought up the rear, holding his gun on the couple. The woman was the one who caught Samson's eye. It had been a long time since he'd seen a woman with such a beautiful color. "God damn," Samson said sharply. "What the fuck are you doing here with these old bastards?" He was unable to explain to himself why he felt the woman to be out of place in that house. "Turning tricks, goddammit," she answered abruptly. "Is anything wrong with that?" Samson admired her magnificent teeth as she spoke. "Nah, baby. I guess we all have to live," Samson replied as he let his eyes roam all over her. She had put on her skirt, but Danny hadn't allowed her time to put on anything but that and a bra. Her breasts stood out in the tight-fitting bra like ripe melons. "You trick with all these guys?" Tubby asked, not able to hide the emotion in his voice. She turned on him like a cat. "I don't see why that should be any of your business," she yelled. Though she was scared, she had the feeling that the men in the masks wouldn't hurt her. Why would they have gone to the trouble of hiding their faces, she reasoned, if they were going to kill everybody in the house? Ever since she had started coming over and tricking with the men in the Numbers house, she feared something like this would happen. The men handled too much money, and she had never believed them to be strong enough to stop someone from robbing them. Now, as she stared at the men with their hands up in the air, she remembered the idle boasts they had made about what they would do if someone tried to knock them off. Every word they had said had been bullshit. She could see the fear in their eyes. They were actually more frightened than she was. The thought gave her strength, and she smiled. "You find something funny?" Samson asked. "Or were you thinking how much fun it would be if we all decided to lay a little dick in you before we left?" His words wiped the smile off her face. Her eyes became hard, and she suddenly became frightened. It was the masks, but she didn't realize that was the root of her fear. They made the men seem like beings from another world, and she couldn't relate to them. Tubby wet his lips and scratched at his nuts. "Man," he began, slobbering slightly, "you think we might have time to knock off a piece like that? Goddamn, I ain't never laid no broad like her." The fat man was trembling as he stared at her. It was tempting, but Samson decided not to take the risk. "Man, are you nuts? Fuck a piece of pussy. We come for the cash, that's all. You want to blow this thing for a piece of ass, man?" The tall, slim girl leaned back against the wall with relief. For a minute, she believed she would have to take all the men on, something that definitely didn't appeal to her. She tried to stop her legs from shaking. She didn't want the men to see just how upset she had become. "Tie them up," Samson ordered, tossing the rolls of tape to his two henchmen. "Step on it. We want to get the fuck out of here as soon as possible." Danny made quick work of his man, then moved on to the next one. Tubby had fucked around on his tying job so that Danny had to do it for him. Tubby moved towards the woman and made her sit on the floor and put her hands behind her back. As soon as he got her hands tied behind her, he began to touch her breasts. The more he felt the woman, the more aroused he became. He put his hands between her legs and played with her. She began to cry, and the more she cried, the more aroused Tubby seemed to become. Samson had watched it all from the beginning. He had nodded towards Tubby when Danny had glanced at him. "Fuck that shit," Danny stated coldly. "Fat-ass nigga, get your hands off that sister." "I don't blame her for crying with your funky ass feeling all over her. Get up, nigga, I said." Danny raised his pistol and leveled it at Tubby. He couldn't explain it to himself, but it made him mad to see Tubby pawing the woman. Tubby scrambled to his feet. Without the pistol being pointed at him, he might have chanced another feel. He had managed to get one finger up inside of her, but that hadn't been enough. To force 3 or 4 of his fingers up in her at one time would have been something, but the sight of that pistol pointing in his direction had completely wiped the thought from his mind. The only thing he wanted to do now was show Danny that he was doing as Danny asked. He knew the man was mad at him, even if he couldn't explain why. "What's wrong, my man?" Samson said as he gathered up the bag containing the money. "Don't tell me you got morals all at once. It ain't that, brother. It's just that I don't like to see no sister debased or degraded like Fat Boy was doing her. She's a whore, yet his fucking behavior was so repulsive that it made her cry. Nah, man, I just can't sit still for no shit like that." "Well, fuck it," Samson said and shrugged his shoulders. "A little squeamishness don't take no man's masculinity away from him. I'll bet you'd like to lay her if I said we had the time." For a second, Danny struggled with his conscience. Then he smiled under his mask. "You had me going for a minute," he said and laughed, "but I know you too well. You ain't about to lay around this joint while we knock off a piece of ass, so let's get the fuck on our way." Both men laughed. As Samson started for the rear of the house, he bent down and felt the woman's breast. "You know, in a way, I can't blame the big guy. This broad really has something to offer a man." Samson got up from his knees and glanced back at the victims. "Let's go," he ordered. The men made their way out of the back door, Samson bringing up the rear. When they reached the car, they didn't see Buddy until he rose up from where he had been lying on the back seat. As the men scrambled in, he asked excitedly, "How did it go? Was it sweet, like I said?" Nobody answered him until Samson got in and started the motor. "Was it sweet?" Samson repeated. "It was like taking candy from a baby. I mean it. It was easier than the one we took off this afternoon." The men laughed and joked as Samson drove out of the alley. They could relax now. It was over. Buddy opened the envelopes and took a quick count of the money. "I believe we got something like $9 grand here," he stated and set the bag down. "It's kind of dark inside the car, so I might not have counted right, but I believe I'm close." $9 grand ain't bad at all," Samson answered as he sped away from the house they just ripped off. Chapter 8. The two men sat around the living room in silence. The television was on, but neither man seemed really interested in what was showing. Each man was deep in thought. In the kitchen, Dolores moved around, making the men something for a late-night meal. When you have something like waiting on a plane to come in, the time moves slow as hell, Copperhead stated. Yeah, I know what you mean, Eldorado Red answered offhandedly. Fuck. What the hell is that woman doing? Growing the goddamn food? Eldorado Red glanced at his watch. Shit! It ain't 12 o'clock yet. We still got over 2 fucking hours to wait for that goddamn plane. Man, Copperhead began, why don't you take that broad in the bedroom and give her some dick? That way, you'll kill some time and quit worrying me to death about how slow it's passing. He had forgotten that he had been the one to comment on how slow the time was passing. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Dolores appeared with steak sandwiches and iced tea. The men grabbed up the delicious-looking snack until there was nothing left but the crumbs. Do you think it will cause you a problem to stay overnight, Dolores? Eldorado Red asked abruptly. Damn, Dolores said under her breath. Here she had been planning and scheming for the past month on how to end up staying all night with his man, and now here he was asking her. But there was no hint of romance involved. It seemed more that he needed a housekeeper than a lover. Well, if that's what he took her for, she made damn sure she ended up being the most expensive housekeeper he ever had. Yes, of course, Red. I'll stay and help you out, she replied quietly. She'd stay so long, he'd have to put her out, Dolores coldly reflected. This beautiful house was the epitome of her dream, even if Red wasn't the man she had daydreamed about sharing it with. But all in all, the money he had would make up for any shortcomings. Goddamn, Red, you use about as much finesse as a bull in a glass building, Copperhead stated as he grinned up at Dolores. Now, if it was me inviting this fine young thing over, I'd have gotten up and took her into one of them bedrooms and talked a little shit to her. But you just come out with it. You want to stay all night, baby, just like that. Dolores tried to blush, putting on an air of shyness. Eldorado Red just waved the matter down. He didn't really care if she stayed or not. The last thing on his mind was sex. If he wanted some pussy, he knew 100 bitches to call. The telephone rang sharply. The sound broke the silence that invaded the ranch-type home. Eldorado Red picked up the receiver. Yeah? His facial features began to change as he listened. What? He exploded. The hell you say? We're on the motherfucking way now. Don't nobody leave! It was an order. The way Red yelled into the receiver left little doubt to the people in the room that something serious had happened. He slammed the receiver back down. Let's ride, Copperhead. Them same motherfuckers have knocked off my other joint. Copperhead leapt to his feet. Looks like you got big trouble, all right. We're just going to have to show them that it don't really pay to fuck with your shit. It makes me and Tank look like poo butts, too. Everybody in the know realizes that we're your enforcers. These punks just don't want to give us our proper. For one of the few times in their relationship, Red came down hard on Copperhead. Maybe that's the reason they think my people done got soft. If it's true, I won't waste no fucking time replacing the soft ones with some young bloods who will take care of the business. I want the fear of God put in these niggas with no ifs, ands, or buts about it. As they rushed towards the car, Copperhead remained silent. There was nothing he could say. He was well aware that Red was upset. He'd settled down in time, but right now, the shock of it was riding him. Too many more blows like the ones he had received today, and he'd be completely knocked out of the box. Nobody could stand it. Not anyone Red's size, anyway. It would take a much bigger numbers man than Red to be able to stand a $15,000 or $20,000 ripoff. It was just Lady Luck smiling down on them that prevented them from getting a ticket on the way to the North End. Red broke every law in the books as he put his foot down on the accelerator and kept it there until they slowed down and parked. Copperhead let out a sigh of relief, thankful to be out of the car. High speeds always upset his stomach. Red had been angry earlier, but now he was about to explode. His face had turned a dark red, and a vein in his forehead was so swollen that it looked deformed. He pounded on the front door of the house, forgetting that he had the key in his pocket. "Why don't you slow down a little, Red? This is going to take sharp thinking. Running off angry ain't gonna solve the problem. Just get control of yourself. Then we could get to the bottom of this shit." El Dorado Red glanced sharply at Copperhead. Before he could make an angry reply, the door opened. Mike stood in the doorway. "Come on in. We've been waiting for you," he said as he stepped aside so that the men could get past him. Red stalked in, followed closely by Copperhead. Inside the living room were the two other men. They sat quietly, waiting for the questions to begin. Mike brought up the rear and quickly got out of the way and found himself a chair. "Okay," Copperhead began. "Which one of you would like to tell us what happened?" Willie Brown, the man who had been in the bedroom with the woman, began to speak. "We were all sitting in here getting the figures together when these guys popped up. They just came through the dining room as if somebody had let them in the back way." Willie held up his hand and added, "But that ain't possible because I had checked the back door when we came in. I always made sure it's closed and locked up tight." As the man talked, Red lit up a cigarette and listened. "Wasn't anybody else but you three guys, right?" he asked. A funny kind of silence fell on the room. Then Willie picked it up where he had left off. "Red, you know us. We've been working for years with you. Don't nobody else work out of this house but us." "Well then, just how in the fuck did three motherfuckers get in? Three guys just don't walk through the goddamn air without somebody hearing something. Yet you guys want me to believe they didn't come in the back door? They didn't break no window to get in? They just popped out of thin air, right?" Exasperated, Willie tossed his hands in the air. "I can't understand it, Red, because we didn't hear nothing until it was too late. Then the motherfuckers were here. One was thin, the other fat, and the leader husky, right?" Copperhead asked. "That's right. That's just how they look. Plus, they call the thin one Danny." Before anyone could ask Mike any more questions, he added, "It wasn't no put on either, Red. The fat guy made the mistake and then tried to catch himself, but it was too late." As El Dorado Red began to stare at him closely, Mike continued, "There was one more thing, too. I think the guy called Danny was an addict. He looked as if he had a long track on his hand on the back of it." "Good," Red said. "That's a hell of a lot better than that shit we got from the other joint. You are sure of all this, right, Mike? You ain't just giving me a snow job now, are you?" "No way, Red. No way in the world. And for what reason? I ain't got no reason to want to snow you. I want these punks caught too," Mike reasoned quietly. As Red continued to question them, Copperhead walked off. He examined the kitchen, then came back into the living room. "You guys touch anything back there?" he asked. Willie Brown shook his head. The medium-sized black man rubbed his protruding stomach as he tried to recall everything that might be important. "Nah, we made it a point not to bother anything back there since that has to be the way they came in." A vague idea flashed through Copperhead's mind, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He removed a pad from his pocket and tore off 3 sheets of paper. "I want each of you to write down every person that you know who's been in this house and who knows what goes on here." He passed out the sheets, then stopped in front of Red. "I'd appreciate it if you would do the same thing, boss." He held out the paper. Red hesitated, then took it. As the men got busy writing down the names, Copperhead went back into the kitchen. He examined all the windows, then went into the bedroom. He reappeared after a few minutes carrying an ashtray. "Who's the broad you guys had up here tonight? Or was there more than one?" From the way the men jumped when he mentioned the woman having been here, Copperhead realized at once that he had hit on something. The men tried to deny it, but Copperhead wouldn't accept it. "Stop lying," he ordered sharply. if you bastards got nothing to hide about this robbery, don't let me keep catching you lying, because then I'm going to think you boys might have figured this robbery out all by your lonesomes. He removed the cigarette from the ashtray. The lipstick on it could be seen by everyone. El Dorado Red's anger returned. I don't want no shit, he screamed. If you motherfuckers had some whores up here, we want to know about it, he yelled. Then he turned on Mike. How much fucking money was in tonight's take anyway? A little more than $10,000, Red. I don't know the actual figures. Willie and Jack was handling that. For the first time, the short, bumpy-faced man named Jack spoke up. There was $10,562 in a nice take, Jack stated in a high, shrill voice. The sight of the cigarette with lipstick on it had frightened the man to death. Reading the fear in the man's eyes, El Dorado Red pushed his questions home. Now, Jack, if I find out you're lying to me, it's going to cost you more than just this fucking job. You've been working for me for over 10 years now, so you'll kind of miss your paycheck. Plus, you're gonna need some money for your hospital bill. The mention of a hospital bill did the trick. I ain't got no reason to lie, Red. Honest, it wasn't none of my whore, no way. I told Willie about bringing her in here in the first place, he said in his shrill, frightened voice. You lying little cocksucker, Willie yelled angrily. You fucked the bitch as well as Mike, too. Every fucking one of us balled her, so ain't nobody excused. Willie turned to Red, but she didn't have nothing to do with it, Red. She's been coming in here for over a year now, and nothing like this has ever happened. Copperhead let out a grunt. How about that? Can you speak for her pimp, too? He asked sarcastically. You guys put her name on them lists. Plus any more whores you dumb motherfuckers have drunk in off the street. Red, it's a wonder your joint ain't been knocked off before now, Copperhead stated as he glanced over one of the men's shoulder to see what name he was writing. You better put her address down there, Willie, and her phone number so we can get in touch with her as soon as possible. I swear to you, Red, she ain't had nothing to do with this robbery, man. You should have seen the way them guys treated her. They wanted to rape her, right here in front of everybody, especially the fat one. He couldn't keep his hands off of her. When he tied her up, he stuck his fucking hand all the way up her cunt, man. He caused the broad to start crying. Oh, bullshit, Willie. You gonna tell us a whore started crying because some motherfucker stuck his hand in her pussy? The bitch more than likely came all over his hand, Red stated harshly, then added, I guess you guys know this just about knocks the wheels from under you. As far as I'm concerned, all three of you knew I didn't want no bitches coming in this joint. Now, you're the cause of me losing over $10,000. The girl ain't got nothing to do with it, Red, Mike managed to say. Even if you fire me, it don't change matters. The girl didn't have anything to do with it. Red glanced from one to the other. This must be one hell of a whore, Copperhead, to have all these motherfuckers so sure she didn't set them up. I'd stake my life on it, Jack managed to say before Red cut him off. You might have already staked it on just that, Jack. Copperhead beckoned for Red to come back to the kitchen. Suppose we stop by and pick up this bitch on our way to the airport, he said, glancing down at his watch. We got just about 1 hour left before we have to be there. So let's run over and pick up this bitch and take her along. When Tank gets off the plane, he could give me a hand getting rid of the bitch if it added up to being she's responsible for these stick-ups. Red agreed, then added, I don't really think she's responsible, Copperhead. Not because of what these old cum freaks say either. Why then? Copperhead asked. For just a minute, Red leaned against the window, still deep in thought. He turned around and faced Copperhead. First, Don't none of these guys know about my other joint? Or if they know about it, they don't know where it's located. So I don't see how they could have set up both joints. Nah, it has to be deeper than what we've come up with so far. But still, we're not going to overlook this whore. Copperhead led the way back into the front room. The small group of men fell silent at their return. Which one of you guys is going to show us where this broad stays? Copperhead asked. We ain't got no time for any bullshit, so let's get on with it. Willie got up from the couch. He didn't like the idea of going by Vera's house, but he didn't have much choice. You guys finish up here, Red said to the other men before leaving, and I'll talk to you sometime tonight when you come back to work. Red knew that he was going to have trouble trying to replace all 3 men at one time. If it had just been one, he could have easily handled that, but all 3 of them caused him a problem. The men remained silent in the car. As Red followed the directions Willie gave him, they stopped at an apartment building. You think I better go up alone? Willie asked nervously. Dorado and Copperhead got out without speaking. They followed Willie up the steps. The men took an elevator up to the 3rd floor, where Willie knocked on the door. Who is it? The sound of a woman's voice came floating out to them. It's me, Willie, honey. Willie blushed as the 2 men with him glanced coldly in his direction. The door opened, and Vera appeared, wearing a nightgown of black silk. The light from behind her made it possible for the men to see the outline of her beautiful body. I'll be damned, Copperhead managed to say as he stared at the beautiful woman. Even Dorado Red was taken aback by the loveliness of the woman. He stared at her like a country boy. As he looked into her eyes, he could feel his breath catching. It had been a long time since he'd seen such a beauty. The woman standing before him appeared to have stepped out of a dream. Well, she said coldly, what the hell's the idea, Willie, of bringing all these people up to my place? You know I don't like strangers coming here. Then that makes us even, honey, Red stated harshly, finding his voice. I don't much like the idea of strangers going to my place either. For the first time, Vera glanced up at the tall, light-complexioned man. If I remember correctly, I've never been to your place, she replied rather sharply. I'm sorry about this, Vera, Willie began, but you see, it was this fellow's place that them guys knocked off. I just happened to work for him. This is Dorado Red. The name seemed to ring a bell with her. She opened the door wider. Won't you come in out of the hallway? For a brief second, the men hesitated, waiting to see what Red would do. He led the way into the nicely furnished apartment and took a seat on a luxurious red couch. Now how can I help you, gentlemen? Vera inquired as she picked up a robe and slipped it around her shoulders. It did little to hide what was underneath. We would like to know what you can tell us about that robbery tonight, Copperhead asked harshly, finally shaking off her spell. Now, he could deal with her as a person. At first, her beauty had completely overwhelmed him. Nothing, she said coldly. I ain't know anything about it except that I was there when it happened and wish to God I hadn't been. That really wasn't the kind of answer Copperhead was hoping for. Then would you be kind enough, young lady, to tell us what your pimp's name is? Copperhead took out the lists and began to look at them so that he would have something to do other than stare directly into the woman's eyes. I'm sorry, but I don't happen to have a pimp, Vera answered gravely. And that's the truth. Whether or not you believe me, I don't have a man. Copperhead had pulled out the list Dorado had made out earlier from the first holdup and the list that Mike had given him from the second robbery. One name from both lists jumped out at him. He opened his mouth to speak, then read the lists again to make sure. It was the only name that appeared on both lists. Red? Copperhead yelled. Who the fuck is this guy, Buddy? He turned the pages over, trying to keep his excitement down. Buddy? Red exclaimed. Buddy is my son. Why? The letdown could be seen all over Copperhead's face. Damn. Nah, Red, for just a minute I thought I had something. It seems your son is the only dude on the list who happened to know the whereabouts of both your joints. Well, he should, Red stated. He has the job of cleaning both of them up every night. Something was bothering Copperhead, but he couldn't put his finger on it. How about giving me a key to both joints? Me and Tank will want to go over them, he said thoughtfully. Miss, Red said after acknowledging Copperhead's request, would you be kind enough to ride out to the airport with us? I would like to talk to you a little more. Then we'll drop you back off. Vera started to say no, but the man seemed so sincere that she couldn't turn him down. If you'll wait a second, I'll slip into something, she replied. She disappeared into the bedroom and was back in minutes wearing a tight-fitting pants outfit. On the way to the airport, Eldorado Red dropped Willie off and then caught the freeway towards the airport. They rode in complete silence. Copperhead was absorbed in his own thoughts. Something was trying to come to light, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He knew that once he got in touch with Tank, between them, they'd get a line on what was worrying him. As Eldorado Red pulled into the airport and parked, Vera glanced over at the expensively dressed man. I guess they hit you kinda hard, huh? He laughed coldly. It's not just the small house they knocked off, but they knocked off my big house earlier in the day for close to $20,000. Vera managed a small whistle. That's a lot of bread, no matter how you look at it, she stated. Yeah, Red said softly, but it ain't gonna be worth a cent to them, honey, because you can bet your last dollar we're going to find out who those jokers are. Copperhead got out of the car. What you gonna do? Lay out here in the parking lot or go on in with me? You go ahead and meet the plane, Copperhead. I'll be sitting out here talking to the young lady. It don't take both of us to walk Tank back to the car, Red stated with a grin. He knew he was going to enjoy the fine company of the young woman next to him. For some reason, Vera found herself drawn to the tall, light-complexioned man. He seemed so sure of himself. Maybe it was the fact that he represented big money. But money didn't mean that much to her. She made more than she could ever spend herself, so his money wasn't what drew her to him. You know, there's something about you, Red, that I really like. I believe that's the only reason I came out here tonight. Because you asked me, she stated, smiling up at him. For the first time that day, Eldorado allowed himself to laugh. Well, that's nice to hear, coming from a woman with your looks. It makes me feel nice to know I'm thought about in that fashion. They both laughed. It was spontaneous. In a matter of seconds, Vera found herself in his arms. They kissed slowly at first, then longer until they both could feel the tension running between them. The current was completed, and the sparks flew. The sound of someone knocking on the car window caused them to break apart. Copperhead got in the car and was followed by Tank. Tank slid his suitcase in first, then maneuvered his huge frame into the back seat. What's happening, Red? Tank said. I thought you was having trouble, but I see you sure don't need our help. At least you shouldn't want it. The men in the car laughed as Red started up the motor. They talked as Eldorado Red drove back to town. By the time they reached the city limits, Tank knew as much about the robberies as anyone else in the car. For the first time, Vera had finally gotten some idea as to the scope of the robberies. She also realized just how big a man Eldorado Red was. There was nothing small about his numbers operation. Red drove to his ranch house and parked in the driveway. Vera raised her eyebrows. What's this? I just thought you wanted me to drive out to the airport with you, honey, she stated in a soft voice as she got out of the car and took Red's arm. He led the way up to the porch. I did, Vera, but that was before I found out how I felt about you. It may sound silly since I just met you, but that's the way it is. Now, I don't want you out of my sight. I mean it. I've never met a woman before who I wanted to have beside me all the time, but they say there's a first time for everything. Eldorado made the statement quietly, and she could feel the sincerity in his words, but words were not necessary because Vera felt the same thing. For the first time in quite a while, she had met a man whom she really wanted to be with. To go back to her lonely apartment now without him would just cause her to have another sleepless night. A woman living without a man to take care of was only half a woman, and Vera knew it. It was why she felt her life was so empty, but every man she met had been interested in her earning potential and not in her. Before El Dorado Red could put the key in the lock, Dolores opened the door from inside. The big smile on her face died at the sight of the golden woman on Red's arm. She managed to cover up somewhat, but Vera had seen it instantly. She wondered as she stepped into the house if Dolores was Red's woman. She decided she would find out as soon as possible. If there was something she wouldn't stand still for, it was sharing her man with another woman. She believed she was too much woman for that. If a man couldn't be satisfied with just her, then she didn't need him. Another person who noticed the exchange was Copperhead. "Hey, honey," he said to Dolores as he came into the door. "How about you fixing you and me a big drink? I think we can both use it." At first, Dolores started to tell him to get the goddamn drink himself. Then she glanced at him closely and understood that the man was just trying to be kind. He understood more than she had realized. Then, the sight of the huge man coming in behind Copperhead caught her attention. She didn't believe she had ever seen such a whiff on a man. She stared at him in wonder. Then it dawned on her that this man had been brought in because of the robbery. Well, she was thankful she didn't have anything to do with them. Just the sight of him made her believe that the stick-up men had trouble coming. The huge man's face was as strange as the rest of him. It appeared to be made out of rock. His eyebrows were shaggy, and the dark eyes that stared out were midnight black. Unaware of the heartache he had caused, Red stopped in the middle of the living room and introduced the women. "Vera, this is Dolores. She's one of my very best pickup girls." Before the women could speak, he went on, not wanting Vera to get the wrong impression. "Dolores was nice enough to stay at the house tonight while I ran all over town trying to get this shit straightened out." After introducing the women, he again didn't notice Dolores grit her teeth as she attempted to be nice to Vera, but it was a case of hate on first sight. She realized instantly that Vera was destroying her every dream. The big house was disappearing faster than it had ever appeared in her life. Before she could even put her feminine plans to work, they were destroyed by another woman. From the way Red looked at Vera, Dolores knew her scheming was at an end. Vera glanced around the house curiously. She could well understand the other woman's anger. It wasn't hard for her to see that Dolores had set her cap for Red. But from what she could see, it looked as if he hadn't even given her a tumble yet. If Vera had anything to do with it, she'd make sure he never found the time. She had finally found a man that she really liked, and she had no intention of letting him escape. Everybody made themselves comfortable in the living room, and Dolores served drinks. "We'll need to use a ride, Red," Copperhead stated, "until I can get across town and pick up my car. So if you don't feel like driving anymore, I'll take care of it." Red nodded in agreement. "Ain't no kind of problem there. But I want you guys to stay here for the night. Get plenty of rest, then get on the case in the morning. Maybe you'll be able to think better after you had a little rest." Tank stretched his arms out. "That sounds good to me. We can get up and take us a quick swim in your pool back there, then get on the case." "You like to swim, Vera?" Red asked, staring deeply into her eyes. She nodded that she did. "Good then," Red continued. "I didn't ask, but honey, I hope you don't mind staying here for the night. That way, we can get up in the morning and have a good swim together." "No, I don't mind staying tonight, as long as I stay with you," she replied, not bothering to lower her voice. Her reply caused Red to grin from ear to ear like a schoolboy. "There is nothing in the world that would make me happier," he said as he stood up and reached down to help her to her feet. He led the way back to his king-size bedroom. If looks could kill, the look that Dolores gave them as they went past would have put them both in their graves. Copperhead laughed and spoke to Dolores. "Well, honey, sometimes you can win some of them, but not all of them. So if you don't mind taking second best, I'd be more than pleased if you join me in my room for a drink." The hatred in Dolores' eyes made Copperhead step back. "That's all right, dear," he said quickly. "Just forget I offered it to you, before you let your anger make you say something to me I couldn't overlook." Dolores jerked her skirt up tightly, spun around on her heels, and stomped out. I think you better pull Red's coat tomorrow to get rid of her, Tank stated. Don't make sense raising no snake in your house that's just looking for a chance to bite you. Copperhead stared at the retreating woman's back. He removed the lists from his pocket and moved over on the couch next to Tank. Yeah, Tank, you got a good point there, because it looks like Red might have a snake in his house that's already real close to him. Copperhead spread out the lists so that Tank could read the names that were on them. For the next hour, the two men stayed in the living room talking and getting a closer line of what had happened earlier that day. Chapter 9. It was past 10 o'clock in the morning before anyone appeared in the backyard at the pool. Everybody had ended up sleeping longer than they had planned. Tank and Copperhead splashed water on each other as they enjoyed their early morning swim. They were both filled with the exhilaration of being alive. Man, Tank exclaimed loudly, this is what I call living high on the hog. Using the palm of his hand, he splashed water in Copperhead's face. Baby boy, you better enjoy it. It ain't often that you'll get a chance to wake up and step into your own fucking pool. You better believe it, Tank. True words have never been spoken. The sound of the men playing around in this pool aroused El Dorado Red from a deep sleep. The first thing to meet his eye was a perfectly shaped breast. He blinked, closed his eyes, then reopened them. It all came to him in a flash. Slowly, he opened his arms, and that well-shaped bundle of joy slipped right into them. That's better, Vera whispered in his ear. For a minute, I thought you might like to go out and do a little participating with the other men. They sound like they're having so much fun. You must think I'm crazy, or do I just look sort of crazy to you? Which one is it? Because a sound-minded man couldn't possibly think of leaving where I'm at right now. Really now, Red? After what you put me through early this morning, I think you've had enough lovemaking to hold you a lifetime. Vera's voice was husky and low as she whispered quietly to him. Oh, honey, please, I don't think I could stand it if you're up to it. I'm really sore, you know. Too sore? He asked as he kissed each one of her breasts tenderly. Well, I don't know about that. I might not be too sore, but the only way I could find now will be by trying it, she giggled as she rolled over on her back. Red slowly mounted the woman. If it hurts you, Vera, just let me know, he said as he began to slowly force himself into her. For the next 20 minutes, they made love. The only sound coming from the bedroom was that of a large king-size bed. Every now and then, a moan would be heard, but other than that, it was quiet. The only person interested in what was going on in the bedroom was Dolores. She leaned against the wall outside the bedroom as she waited for her cab. A tear of frustration ran down her cheek as she stood frozen outside of the room. The anger she felt was all aimed at Vera. From the conversation with Copperhead, she had learned that El Dorado Red had just met the woman the day before. The sound of a car horn outside broke her out of her trance. She walked slowly from the house, aware in her heart that it would probably be the last time that she would ever be inside that house. I wonder who the fuck that is out there blowing, Tank said as he climbed out of the pool. More than likely it's the cab our girl Dolores called, Copperhead stated as he followed Tank out of the pool. Oh yeah, the jealous bitch. She ain't left yet? Tank inquired as he began to dry himself off with a large towel. Nah, she hadn't when we came out, but she has by now. She was calling the cab then, Copperhead explained to his partner. Oh well, that's the way the cookie crumbles at times, Tank said philosophically. It's a good thing that broad pulled up, though, because she spelled pure trouble for Red if she stayed around here. For a second, he remained silent as he reflected on it. Then he added, from what I saw, Red acts as if the bitch didn't even exist. I mean, he completely ignores her. Yet anyone with eyes can tell she must have been his woman or something, the way she digs him. Nah, that ain't it, Tank. The broad just brought that shit on herself. Ain't nothing between them. From what Red said, he ain't never even balled her. He was going to when we got back from the airport, but that was before he met this Vera chick. How do you know all this shit? Tank asked. I asked him, Copperhead answered quickly. I wanted to hit on this chick myself, so I asked Red yesterday if I would be stepping on his toes if I tried to trim the broad. But he said he didn't give a shit. He was going to try and trim the broad himself, like I said. But after one look at Vera, he must have completely forgot about it. After one look at Vera, quite a few guys will forget about another bitch, Tank stated. Here, man. Hit my back with this towel, Tank. I can't stand the feel of water on my back. Wipe it good, because I don't want it fucking up my silk shirt. Tank did as he was asked. What's on the program for today, he inquired, as the men started back towards the house. Before replying, Copperhead stopped on the patio and stared out at the neatly kept grass. It's something I can't figure out, but I think the key to this whole motherfucking thing is back at the house they knocked off last night. I want to go find out how them punks got in. Then we'll go from there. Yeah, it makes sense. It has to be a setup from where I sit. I can't see no other way around it, Copperhead. The guys just walked in? No way. Somebody had to pull their coat to what they were walking in on. If not, you couldn't pay them guys to walk in a number's house without knowing beforehand how many guns were there and who was furnishing the protection. Uh-huh. My mind comes up with the same motherfucking thought, Copperhead replied quickly. Let's get the fuck on over there and check the shit out. Both men dressed quickly. I'll get the car keys, Tank, while you straighten up in there a little. Ain't no sense leaving the bedrooms fucked up. I don't think Red has got 'em made, so do what you can so it won't look too bad, alright? Tank nodded his head in agreement as he started to make up the bed, and when he finished, he removed the pistol from under the pillow and stuck it in his shoulder holster. Copperhead was waiting in the hallway. Well, Tank began, it didn't take you long to get the car keys. Was the boss busy? Copperhead grinned. I don't know. Cocksucker wouldn't let me in the bedroom. He had left the keys on the motherfucking dining room table. It figures, Tank stated as they went out the door. Just how much dough is the job paying us? Oh, it's sweet, partner. You could bet on that. Whatever cash we find on the punks that took this off belongs to us. Plus the fact that if we ain't satisfied with it, all we have to do is ask for more. You mean everything? Tank asked, surprised. Hey, baby, the way I add that up, it's big stuff. Them punks ripped off over 25 grand, didn't they? That's right. Your adding ain't bad. Counting the take from both jobs, it's over 25 grand. That's why we've got to move fast. We don't want them punks to have no time to spend the bread. It don't take long to blow when you go buying Cadillacs and diamond rings, Copperhead stated as he stopped to raise the garage door. Tank let out a high-pitched laugh as they climbed into the car. Yeah, I can dig where you're sure enough coming from. If them punks have the time, all that cash will be blown. He waited until Copperhead backed the car out into the street before adding, I think we had better bring this job to a close before this week is out. A week's too long, Copperhead answered quickly. If we can find something to go on at that house, we might just be able to blow the lid off this motherfucker before tomorrow night. As the hip white kids would say, groovy, baby, Tank yelled over to his partner, almost busting his eardrums in the tight space inside the car. After that, both men fell silent, thinking about the job ahead of them. The fact that they would have to kill somebody didn't disturb them at all. Copperhead pulled up and parked in front of the numbers house. The men sat for a moment staring at the building. Well, this is it, Tank said, opening his door. Copperhead got out and met him on the sidewalk. The men went up the walk side by side. Suddenly, Copperhead stopped and popped his fingers. Those guys came in from the back, Tank, so let's walk around to the rear of the house. I've been inside, but I didn't have the time to examine the outside last night. Without answering, there was a dilapidated barn behind the house, and where there had once been grass was now a dirt lot complete with rocks and bottles. The yard appeared to have been at one time the drinking bin of some aging wineheads. The large accumulation of wine bottles couldn't have come naturally. Moving with the agile swiftness of a man much smaller than himself, Tank jumped up the steps and leaped over the broken one at the top. He landed lightly on the back porch. After a quick survey of the rear door, he jumped back down. While Tank had been checking out the rear door, his partner had been kneeling down, checking out the windows in the rear of the house. They came out the back way, Tank stated as he joined his friend, but from the tracks on the porch, they damn sure didn't go in that way. I got a hunch, Copperhead said as he got up out of the dirt, that we'll find the answer to damn near everything we want back here. Copperhead led the way, checking each window that he came to. Finally, one of them opened easily under his touch. He raised the window up. It goes up easy enough, that's for damn sure, he said as he stuck his head inside the basement. He glanced around in the darkness. then pulled his head back out. "We're going to have a flashlight before we can check out this basement, right? It's completely dark down there." He stood up and knocked the dirt off his knees. "Let's check out the trunk of the car for a damn flashlight, then we'll get on with it." As they reached the car, Tank said, "You had better take a quick look in the glove compartment too." "Yeah, Tank," Copperhead replied, but there was no bitterness in his words. "I'm glad you thought of that. It would have never entered my mind," he stated as he took the keys out and opened up the Cadillac glove compartment. The large silver flashlight almost fell out onto the floor. Both men laughed as Copperhead removed the light. This time they went through the front door of the house. Copperhead didn't stop, but led the way straight back into the stairway leading down to the basement. As they went down the steps, Tank reached out and hit the light switch. Instantly, the whole basement was flooded with light. The sudden light took Copperhead by surprise. He stopped on the stairway and stared around, then burst out laughing. "God damn you, Tank! I see you still thinking for me. Why didn't you pull my coat outside that the light switch worked?" The two men laughed together, the way two friends would do. Tank came on down the steps and joined his partner. Copperhead swung the useless flashlight back and forth as he led the way over to the half-open window. "Hey," Tank yelled excitedly as he glanced at the window, "this motherfucker has got oil or something all over it." Copperhead grinned at his friend. "It's just about all out in the open now, brother. All we got to do is check and recheck. It's definitely an inside job, so it's just a matter of using a little common sense." "Yeah, I can dig it. It's like a motion picture. It's slowly coming to the conclusion. I went over these lists last night thoroughly, and I saw something that's damn revealing." Copperhead sighed deeply. "I think I know just what you're talking about. The same name keeps jumping off the motherfucking list, yet it still don't make sense." Copperhead raised his hand, cutting off any reply. "I know what the goddamn problem is, too." He removed both lists from his pocket. His index finger stopped at one name in particular. "This has got to be our boy. He cleans up this joint, so who would have had a better chance than him to put the fix on the fucking window? Next, he's the only motherfucker whose name appears on both lists." In other words, Tank said easily, this kid is the only one who really knows the whereabouts of both the goddamn houses. Next to El Dorado Red, Tank. He is the only one who knows, if we go by our list. Copperhead was silent for a second, then added, "I believe that Red realized this too, but just doesn't want to face up to the fact that his own son has set him up." "What happens if what we're guessing at now comes out to be the real deal?" Tank asked slowly as he lit up a Pall Mall. Copperhead glanced over at his partner. "We already have the green light to make a hit, but I'd take the time to make a phone call or two." This concludes today's edition of Ralph Reads. I would like to thank you queens and kings, fellow royalty, for stopping by. You may connect with me on Twitter and Instagram, as well as Periscope, at rgmc2407. Drop me an email at rgmc2407@gmail.com. If you would like to leave a small donation, please do so via paypal.me/rgmc2407 or the Cash App. My cash tag is rgmc2407. We are Ronin. You can find me on my very own channel, RGMC Ralph Garcia, Master of Ceremonies, and right here at home on the United Ronin Networks. Fellow royalty, pick up a good book, read a good story, and set your good self free. I appreciate you and love you like cooked food. I will see you folks for the continuation of this story on Ralph Reads. Peace out.